everyone, it's me, Anne-Marie, and welcome to our city homestead. Today we will be making Hamburg steak out of a 1936 Blue Ribbon Cookbook. Let's get started.
Here's the cookbook we looked through last week, and here's a recipe for Hamburg steak and the one we'll be making today. I am using ground beef, but in 1936 they just chopped up meat like roast beef or whatever they were able to get, and they chopped it or ground it fine. But today, since we have access to ground beef, that is what I am using, and I got it from our local butcher. I'm just breaking it up a little bit. And then we'll be adding a few ingredients. I'm starting with some salt and pepper. And that's all the recipe called for. So that is all I am going to be doing for seasonings for the meat patties. The recipe calls for onion juice, but instead of grating the onion and then using the juice from that, I am simply using a small onion that I chopped up really fine. And then we're adding 3/4 cup of milk and 1 egg. We are going to stir that well. It was a little bit hard to break up the meat and stir that into the milk, but do your best. I'm thinking in 1936 that their cup measures might have been slightly different. I know my grandma used a coffee cup and a teacup to measure ingredients depending on what she was measuring. The coffee cup was used to measure flour, and the teacup was used to measure other things like sugar. So I'm thinking that maybe a teacup was used to measure the milk. In any case, I have 3/4 cup of milk in here. It does seem to be a little bit much, but I'm just going to incorporate the best I can and stir it really, really well. As you can see, the milk is starting to incorporate into the meat. Just keep stirring. I decided, since there is no way I can shape this into a patty, that I would add in some crumbled bread. Now this bread is stale, so it crumbles easily. And I'm starting with just one little slice first because it's easy to add more but not take away. And we don't want to have to add more milk to our meat mixture. Stir that really well and get the bread incorporated into that meat, and it'll start soaking up some of that milk. As you can see, the meat mixture has thickened up quite a bit, but not quite enough to be able to form patties. So I will be adding in another piece of bread. I just took a couple of the end pieces and I'm just crumbling it up. And once that's done, we'll stir it again really, really well. You can see just how much thicker the meat mixture is, which will be much easier now to shape into patties. And during the Great Depression, bread was often added to meat as well as oatmeal or even saltine crackers as a way to bulk up the meat. And it was easier to serve more people if you added something like bread or oatmeal to the meat. It'll help stretch the meat. And in this case, we are going to get a lot more patties by adding just that little bit of bread than if we would have had just the meat. You can make these patties any size you like. I'm making some larger, and then I will make a few smaller patties as well. I just pick up the meat with a spoon, and then I shape it kind of like into a meatball a little bit. Press it so that way it doesn't fall apart in the pan. Shape it into a round, and then I flatten it and placing it on a piece of parchment. And then I'll do this until all the patties are formed. Now that all the patties have been shaped, I am melting tallow in my cast iron pan, and I will be frying them until golden on each side. I am also boiling carrots, and once the carrots are fork tender, I will be adding peas to that as well for our main vegetables, and then I will be cooking up some potatoes too. I wasn't quite sure how to get the patty in the pan without having to touch the meat again, and I was just going to flip it off the parchment, but then I didn't want to splatter tallow everywhere, so I decided I would just take it off with my hand and place it in the pan gently. And then I am also lightly pressing it down as well so that it's not so thick. And I'm only adding a few patties at a time so that it doesn't lower the temperature of the pan or overcrowd it either. I am just turning the patties halfway around, so that way it becomes nice and golden all around. Often pans have hot spots, and sometimes it might brown more in the middle than it does at the edge, so I always just rotate it a little bit so that it's more even browning. Once I can see the edges are a little bit browned, I flip the patty over, and I just use the fork to help so that way it doesn't splatter so much either. Once each patty is nicely browned, I am removing it from the pan so I can continue cooking the rest of them. And I'm placing the rest on a baking dish or stoneware. Tonight is what I'm using. And then I will be finishing it off in the oven. I'm adding more patties to the pan now. And I'll be frying these 8 patties in 3 batches. I am rotating the Hamburg steaks once again, just to make sure everything's evenly browned. Now that they are golden brown, I am flipping them to cook them on the other side. And I'm cooking these all well done. I am removing these patties from the pan and I'm going to cook the last of them. Don't they look delicious? They smell amazing too. I am adding a little bit more tallow so that I have a little bit more grease in my pan when I cook the onions. I'm removing the last of the Hamburg steaks, placing it on my stoneware baking pan. And as you can see, all those beautiful bits left in the pan, I am cooking it up with onion first. And I'm going to be making a gravy. Now that's not in this particular recipe, but I decided that we're going to top our steaks with something. So half of them we are doing meatloaf style with just a little bit of ketchup over top, or catsup. And we made some homemade catsup from 1846, which is delicious. Our first batch of catsup from 1846 was a bit of a fail, and you can read all about it at ourcityhomestead.com. I am adding salt and pepper to the onions. My daughter's just spreading the rest of the catsup on the Hamburg patties. But you can just cook them up as is and serve them just like this. But I decided just to spruce it up a little bit. I've now added the peas to the carrots, and I'm just going to be cooking the onion until tender. And I make sure to scrape up all those little bits. And that's why the onions look so dark and brown, is from all the bits from cooking the patties. I am chopping up some potatoes. These are still from our garden this past fall, which is awesome. I'm so glad we're able to grow as much as we could last year. That is actually lasting us most of the winter, which is fabulous. I'm just slicing these in larger chunks, and I'm going to put that into my pot of water. Once all the potatoes have been chopped up, I will drain them, rinse them, and then I will add some more water, a little bit of salt, and I will cook them up. Just be careful when you chop potatoes that have been soaking in water, because sometimes it can stick to the knife. And I always soak them to remove a little bit extra of that starch. And then usually when you mash them, they're a lot lighter and fluffier, and I've always done this for the last 20 years, and it's just the way I cook my potatoes. Now that the onions are tender and cooked, they're lightly browned, we are adding flour. And I'm adding just enough to soak up the excess grease in my pan, maybe about 1/4 cup to 1/3 cup. I never measure. The more flour you put, the more gravy you're going to end up with. So to my couple onions here, I have just a bit of flour, as you can see. I'm just stirring it up here, and we want the flour to lightly brown a little bit and the actual flour to go away. Otherwise your gravy will taste like flour. I'm making this kind of gravy just like my grandma made hamburger gravy, and just all it's going to be for this gravy is the onion that was cooked in tallow, the flour, salt and pepper, and we are going to be adding some milk. You can heat the milk if you like, but I always add it cold, and I just add a little bit at a time for this milk gravy, and I'm stirring it as I pour it in So that way it's not so lumpy and it stays a little bit more smooth. And I just keep stirring the milk in, and as it cooks, it will thicken. And I just add enough milk to get a nice consistency. You don't want it too thin, otherwise it'll just run off of our Hamburg steaks. And you also don't want it too thick, otherwise once you put it in the oven, it'll be thick and stodgy and not very good. So I'm just adding enough milk to make a nice smooth gravy. The gravy is thickening nicely. We froze a bunch of dill this past fall time. I just chopped it up, put it in a jar, and placed it in the freezer. So I decided to add a little bit of dill to the pan. My daughter was shaking it out, and all of a sudden, we had a huge bunch fall into our pan. I could have taken some of that out. I decided I was just going to leave it. So yeah, this was a super dilly onion gravy, but it was delicious. So I'm just stirring that in really well. And then I taste it for seasonings. And it needed a little bit more salt. I always taste the gravy because when you add the flour in, it's hard to tell how much salt or pepper you need. So I always taste it, and then I add more if it needs it, and if not, that's totally okay. And then if you don't want to make the milk gravy, you could totally add beef stock instead, or even water if you like. This dilly onion milk gravy definitely needed a bit more salt. So I added some salt. I added a little bit more milk because it was a little bit thick. And then I just turn the heat off, let it bubble up a little bit, and then we're going to spoon some over the Hamburg steak. Now that the gravy is ready, I'm going to spoon a little bit, just a little bit onto the patties. I don't want it running all over the pan or anything, so just a little bit. And then my daughter decided that she wanted to spoon that over top. I mean, it is fun, so she took over for me, spooning a little bit of this dilly onion milk gravy over top the Hamburg steaks. Smells delicious. The extra gravy we're just going to put into a bowl, and we'll have that over our mashed potatoes. And then that way I can wash the cast iron pan while it's hot. I just run it under really hot water, scrub it a little bit, and then place it back on the burner while the burner is still hot to finish drying out the pan. We're putting a little piece of cheese over top, and then into the oven it goes. We're using our homemade cheddar cheese, just a little bit, cooking the potatoes till they're fork tender. And once they're done, add them back to the pot with butter and some milk, and then mash them up. I poured a bunch extra milk, and then my daughter just whipped it really good with the potato masher. You can also add salt and pepper if you need, or you can add extra herbs or anything else that you like. Now that the patties are done cooking, we are ready to eat. These Hamburg steaks from 1936 are absolutely delicious. They are tender and so flavorful and great with the toppings or without. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a fabulous rest of your day, and we'll see you again here soon. Bye, everyone.